Hello and welcome. I don't know if anyone will see this or if there's any point making this, but as I'm sure many people know, Haas have just revealed their livery for the 2022 season, and it's very similar to last year's, obviously. This is not going to be a video about the livery. I just wanted to do a little bit of analysis of what I can see going on with the car design now, taking into account that this will be a very early design. It's not going to be what the actual car looks like. But surprisingly, it's not the spec car which everyone was expecting, or at least I was expecting. A quick bit of background. My name's Elliot. I am an engineering student with some experience working in Formula One, but mostly just a passion for uh, picking cars apart, basically, and understanding what's going on. I just wanted to talk about some of what I can see going on with this car design, even though it's obviously not going to be what's actually released. So let's start with the. I'm just going to bring up a pen. It will drop the quality of the image, I'm afraid, but that'll be okay. Ignore the front wing. Ignore the rear wing. Well, I suppose that's what you can ignore for now. These are both pretty much as spec as it gets. They've really not shown anything here, unsurprisingly. These will be things that they don't want to show. But if we look to this side view design, you can clearly see that there is no DRS pylon up here. Again, this looks like one of the spec rear wings with really, really thin rear wing pylons, the two swan necks. No DRS, as there wasn't on any of the cars that we've been shown to date, but there will be DRS on the actual car. If we go back to this front view, first thing I notice is the triangle roll hoop, like Ferrari have had a few times in the past. I don't remember if they had it last year. I'm not sure if Haas have maybe had it in 2019 or 2018. But yeah, we got the triangle roll hoop there. But one of the main things that I'm sure everyone's noticed is these tiny side pod inlets and really wide side pods out here. You can't really see much of the floor down here because it's kind of blocked by the suspension, as in the floor inlet. But you can from the side view. So I'll pop back to there in a minute. One last thing on this is noticing the sort of squareness of this nose and the fact that there's no inlet duct at the front. Now, I imagine some of these models here will be sort of early aero design models, which won't include things like tyre temp sensors, which you might have on the end plates here, which I think Mercedes had last year. It won't have any nose ducts for cooling. It might not include some of the impact structures, such as the side impact structure, which sits in the side pod, which I'll talk about in a bit. Just because they're getting an idea of what aero concepts work before they start making it an actual thing. But if we switch back to this side view, one thing I do notice is maybe I can adjust the exposure. I can't seem to be able to zoom in, but anyway, so you can see on this outboard end here, it's kind of low with a small outer fence, and then it's much, much higher where it meets the chassis with a bigger inward fence here. And then the floor sweeps down underneath the side pod, which you can't quite see now that I've changed the exposure settings. But some of the things I want to talk about in terms of this is the slope that we've got going on the side pod, how far forward the inlets are compared to the headrest. In fact, that's a very small headrest. It doesn't go far very forward, so maybe that's affecting how far forward I think it is. But yeah, I think the rest of the floor we can ignore for now. Switching to the front view, what I reckon they've done with this floor inlet is, I imagine, although it's slightly hard to see from here because of the suspension, it's doing this. And you've got a small outward strake here. And then, oh, they've only got one inboard fence there by the looks of things. I imagine there's probably a second one here. These are the fences that we've seen on all of the release images. Let me grab one of those. So on this card that we all saw last season, you can see the size of this outboard fence here compared to what the Haas have released. Is much smaller. In fact, I've even made it bigger there than it actually is. And what I imagine the fence will be doing on this spec car is to an extent what barge boards did. Not completely, but it will be pushing some of the turbulent weight from the tyre outboard. If you think from above, your tyres here, we all know that tyres rotate, they produce a lot of turbulence going backwards. That strake, how far out is it going to be? It's going to be like there. Sort of thing, I imagine, with the chassis then here. Oh, it won't get that close to the tyre, but a big fence with this curved shape to it before you get to the main floor is obviously going to push some of this outboard, as well as producing its own vortices that will run along this edge here. I might be wrong in terms of it pushing tyre weight outboard, but I think that that's some intention of it, particularly with this show car that we've seen. One big thing I noticed with this example car they showed us is how skinny. I mean, why would you have it reach so far forwards? You're going to be producing a huge boundary layer on the surface, which is going to like increase the losses in the flow and reduce the cooling capabilities. But there's no space for a side impact structure in here either. Also, whilst we're here, you can look at the rear wing with no DRS and the skinny swan neck pylons. It's very similar to what Haas have shown here. So that's why I think that this rear wing is you can ignore. The same goes for this Haas front wing. But what I imagine is going on with that Haas floor. So I'd say traditionally, or what that concept car showed, is if this is your chassis, it's probably more squared off at the bottom, side of your chassis, then you're going to have your lower side impact structure here, which is like a big carbon tube thing, and you'll put the leading edge of your floor around it. You're then going to have this big outer strake that we saw, or fence, I think they're being called, that then sweeps back to where the floor is. And then you have your other however many fences underneath there, producing their vortices and doing whatever they need to with the flow. I don't quite understand what they do. But you've got the leading edge of the floor around the side impact structure, which is relatively square compared to the side of the chassis. It might even have to come out at a right angle. I'm not entirely sure. What I think Haas have done, or at least in this release image, is I'm not sure where that side impact structure is. But I think that floor inlet comes from much higher up, like this, with a smaller outboard fence. And then I could only see one inward fence, but I imagine there'll be more. And if you compare that to, say, an overlay of this one on the left here, a traditional or standard or release floor, it's higher on the inboard and lower on the outboard. Now, what that suggests to me is you're getting higher energy or higher total pressure air in this sort of inboard section compared to the outboard, and that'll be to do with front wing wake, tyre wake, that sort of thing. And instead of using the fence over here to push any wake outboard, they're literally letting it be pushed out by the top surface of the floor potentially, which you could sort of see here in the way this washes down and out. I imagine they'll be maybe pushing some of any tyre wake that gets stuck on the top surface down and over here. I might be wrong though. But what that would suggest to me with regards to this floor inlet is a much more unloaded front wing inboard towards the nose and heavy loaded midsection of the front wing compared to this, which is still quite heavy loaded in this section here, even more heavy loaded, and then obviously unloaded as it sweeps down to turn into this end plate. How I think it differs, I'll draw it on here. So your main plane, similar in the center section. I think it'll then swoop down if there's any ground clearance anyway, in this midsection, and then sweep back up. So this second element might be relatively similar to what it is here, but I think it'll thicken in that middle portion there. Same goes for this element, but even to a more extent, and then be really skinny on the inboard, being really thick in the middle section before it tapers off again. So you end up with, I haven't quite demonstrated it well, but much less loading in this inboard section. It'll probably be even lower than this. Less loading through here. Heavy loading in this section, as high as they can go probably, and then backing off back down to turn into the end plate. And that will produce much less turbulent, or it'll less pressure loss basically towards the front, this inboard section of the front wing, and less turbulence that reaches towards the floor inlet here. So this will be higher energy compared to this, which will be hence why their side pod inlets are designed this way. So you get the idea here. Imagining there's a few elements. I've not drawn it very accurately, and then this sweeps up into your end plate at the end. But unloaded in this section, heavy loading here, and this gives nice clean air to go to the inboard part here that it has a larger inlet. That same philosophy gives the same sort of idea for this side port. It's why it's so far inboard here and why it doesn't reach far out. It'll suggest that there's much cleaner, higher energy air inwards than there is out here. And if they're managing to keep it high energy, that'll be how they've got the inlet so small. But similar to the launch images, there's no space for a side impact structure up here. Or, I mean, not really down here. I don't think they can have it that low anymore because of the new regulations. But what that is there's two side impact structures on either side of the car, one down low, one up high. And if we look at one of the old racing points, which I think I have, this is what I imagine most teams will have looked at for this year, where you've got your side impact structure in this upper leading edge of the side pod, and then you've got your side pod inlet below it. Now Haas haven't got any room in this upper leading edge for a side impact structure up here. But, I mean, it's potential it's just been left out of this model if it's just an early model or just for launch or whatever reason. But if we look at these side views compared to last year's Haas and the location of, so in last year's Haas, the side impact structure was in this lower leading edge here, but the location of the inlet is this close to the headrest. I'm using the headrest as my guide. It's difficult to really tell from this view, but it's quite far back from the mirrors. In comparison, the inlet on this side pod here is almost in line with the front of the halo, and it's in line with the mirrors, and it's a long distance from the headrest. So the side pod inlet is so much further forward than on last year's Haas. And on this release car, they had this weird sweeping forward side pod, but it's still the actual inlet is probably more in line with the middle, but halfway between the headrest and the front of the halo. But I imagine that the Haas one is sort of situated around about here. And what that means is, if the side impact structure is usually back here, it's not in the leading edge. From this top view, you can see they've got this big bulge going on with their side pods. It bulges out and then tucks back in. I've gone out here, but it's very tight, bulges out and tucks in. And it's not very long. The side pod ends quite early on. And I think what that is suggesting, and I might be wrong, but imagine a traditional Formula One side pod radiator might be shaped like this. It's quite long, a little bit wider at the top, narrows in at the bottom, and you can see how you get your side pod design from that, and it sits at an angle like that sort of thing. I think potentially the Haas one is much shorter and wider, like stubbier. And that's why the side pod sweeps out so much. And it's potential that the angle that they've got it is less severe. I might be wrong. And what that could mean is if you've got your usual headrest comes down chassis, you've got your side impact structure here, which let's say you've turned that into the leading edge of your side pod inlet. Your radiator sits here, your lower side pod, and then you've got your floor inlet at the front here. I hope that makes sense. I've got like a cross section down through the side pods here. The side pod then tucks down. So this is your radiator. Your side pod inlet. Your radiator duct starts from here. Your lower side pod inlet, there's nothing in here, but you've got the side impact structure up in this top one. And then your leading edge of your floor, which will have your lower side impact structure. What I imagine Haas have done, potentially, is if the side impact structure in the Haas is further, well, it's the same position relative to the headrest that you can see here, but their side pod inlet is much further forwards, which is how it can be so skinny. And then you've got a less aggressive angle on the radiator. I might be wrong on that. They might still have an aggressive angle. And then I don't know, maybe the lower side impact structure is here, which allows them to have that angle on the leading edge of the floor. But I'm really not sure on that. But that's how I think they've got that very small side radiator inlet, side pod inlet that's much further forwards, is if they've got the side impact structure situated here as opposed to in the leading edge. And they've got this bulbous shape radiator to go with the bulbous shape of the side pods that I showed here. That's all I think I can take away from these launch images, and I imagine a lot will change. I think these are probably some early aero models that they did. Maybe it's showing the sort of direction that they went in with the design, but I don't imagine it's the final design. But the key things I think that Haas will be doing is an unloaded center section of the front wing, high mid-loading, and this sort of far forwards side pod inlet. In fact, you can see here how far forwards it is. It's right at the front of the cockpit, as opposed to where I think they have been in the past, which is much nearer here. And that's how, in fact, you can see it's still wider at this point where they have been in the past, and maybe where the side impact structure sits, and then it tucks back in to utilize maybe some really high energy airflow that's further forwards and more inboard. Because with cooling, as much as mass flow, amount of air matters, it has to be high energy or high total pressure to be able to do anything useful cooling. So it's sometimes more beneficial to take less air, but it be higher energy than pick up more low energy air, and it's definitely beneficial when it comes to drag. So I hope you guys enjoyed. I know it was only a very basic video of me drawing on the screen, but that's my take on what we can take away from these Haas launch images. So if you enjoyed, I might do some more of some of the other launches if they have anything interesting to look at. Yeah, have a good day.